Okay, good morning,
Good
Dad.
morning.
How are you doing? Do you have a good weekend?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, we'll leave it at that then. So, today is Monday, December 16th, and I'm going to start you off with something about Syria. So, I've
Okay.
seen this around, and we've had a few comments as well. People say that Syria was a trap. Do you believe that Syria was a trap?
No, I don't. um, Syria was a disaster. It was a failure. I think for some people, it's really hard to admit that sometimes the good guys lose. And want to hear, I mean, the axis of resistance and Russia. It was clearly a disaster. And I think it has, like I said earlier, it's really greatly strengthened Israel's position. In the Middle East. So no, I don't see that at all. And I think all the evidence shows too that Russia in particular was trying to save the Assad government. They were bombing the attackers quite heavily, and according to some reports, they killed maybe 1,000 of them. So, and I also understand that they had rushed Wagner fighters there. They were doing what they could to save them. There was no evidence pointing to somehow, this being a trap. I don't see that at all. I just doesn't make sense on any level to me. I've heard
Right.
that. I know, and I know there's some smart people that are putting forward that plan. I think like Brian Berletic, for example, but I think he's completely wrong about that.
Yeah, I think the reason that people are jumping to that conclusion, it's just hard to believe that Syria could fall to this such a small fighting force. The
Yeah,
Syrian army had 270,000 members,
yeah,
and HTS what 20 to 30,000, something like this. Plus, the Syrian army was backed by the Russian military. Those bases there. He said
yeah.
they
It was
the
a it
for
was a it was a small Russian fighting force. They had drawn down, after the end of the Civil War back in 2020. So there weren't a whole lot of Russians, but the Russians that were there were fighting hard.
right. I mean, if you said that they maybe killed even 1,000 of these fighters, that's 3% of this fighting force. It just seems very difficult to believe that such a small force could have toppled this government,
Right.
the whole Syrian army so quickly. And so I think that's why people are jumping to that conclusion
Right.
that maybe
It is a strange event, and when things like happen, but there are all kinds of strange, weird things happen, and so when that happens, people kind of go for these conspiracy theories. Again,
they're fun.
yeah, sometimes they're true. I mean, but I don't see any evidence supporting it. Also, what you have to stop and ask yourself, what it is that you're asking us to believe about the Russian government and the Assad government. You're asking that they would actually subject the Syrian population to the horrors that they're being subjected to now. That they just didn't give a damn about the Orthodox Christians or the Alawites, even though, of course, the Russians are by and large Orthodox Christians, and the Assad's government was Alawite. I mean, we're seeing there already been all kinds of massacres and abuse and so forth. So you're saying that they were willing to do this, to subject this population to these horrors for what? And again, I don't see what they achieve. I don't see it at all.
Mm, yeah, good point. I think it's just hard. I think even HTS couldn't believe it. I think
Yeah,
this wasn't supposed to be the outcome. It just kind of
right.
happened. So people are
Yeah,
searching for an explanation. Like,
yeah,
how
right,
could this have just
right. But that
disappeared? The whole
explanation
country
doesn't work.
disintegrated.
Yeah, no, it is hard to understand. I agree. But that explanation doesn't work. It just doesn't fit with the facts.
Hmm. Okay, well, then if we say I agree that what you say makes sense. I don't understand what would the trap be? Is there trap chaos? But
Right.
whether or not it's a premeditated trap or not, which I don't think it was either, but in a sense, do you think it could be turning into a trap for the Israelis and the Americans and Turks because it's a mess now on their hands?
Yeah. I don't, okay, I really don't think it is for the Israelis. I've heard, a lot of people have argued that. But I think chaos is what they wanted. They've stated that was really their objective, and it was clear, from previous actions. Why did they support Al-Qaeda back at the beginning of the Civil War? It wasn't because they're fans of Al-Qaeda per se, but they're fans of chaos. And they knew that Al-Qaeda, was a weaker party in this conflict, could engender chaos. I think the one thing that Israel doesn't want to see is for HTS, which is, the present iteration of Al-Qaeda in Syria. They don't want them to see that government really consolidate control and establish an effective Al-Qaeda government. Because even though at the current stage, and actually for many years now, Al-Qaeda has been working with Israel and is constantly expressing its support of Israel. And, again, they've backed up those expressions with real actions. I think Israel understands in the long run, Al-Qaeda is not their friend. Remember, it was like Bin Laden with his original statement. One of the things that he pointed to for justifying the 9/11 attacks was the treatment of the Palestinians. They're not friends of Israel. They're not friends of the Jews. And I think that Israel understands that quite well, the Israeli government. So they don't want to see, a successful HTS government there. But they're all in favor of chaos, and I think that's what they're going to get. I think that's what we're going to see. That means weakness. There's no way that, any one party could actually present a threat to Israel. And Israel will be able to constantly use the chaos, as they've already done, to expand their borders.
Mm. Well, in a sense, I think it could be a trap in that Israel grows overconfident, because it seems like they are really set on, this is their window of opportunity to go after Iran. And there was supposedly some call between Netanyahu and Trump talking about Iran. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's where we're headed?
Well, it wouldn't be. Yeah, again, that's... I wouldn't say it was a trap. Well, yeah, you're saying that it was just sort of unintentionally.
Unintentionally, it's going to be a trap for them.
That's I think that's Israel's main that Achilles heel all along, and we've seen it. It's just again and again. Israel holds. Well, prior to October 7th, it had all the cards, and October 7th, it could have actually used to its advantage. There was a lot of sympathy for Israel at that time, and they could have, had a limited attack on Hamas, and they actually could have gotten many of the regional powers, other Arab states, to support them in suppressing Hamas and neutralizing the threat. And they could have strengthened their borders, and they could have ended up actually improving their standing, within the world community. But it was, their hubris and their obviously obvious expansionist ambitions. In other words, they're after a greater Israel, and when they saw it, they went for it, and that's what, and the world saw it too. And greater Israel, if that includes ethnic cleansing and genocide, so be it. That's what they've shown. They've shown that ugly face to the world, and now that Syria's fallen again, that could actually, they could stop right there. They could seize a little bit of territory and stop there. But you're right, they won't. They're going to reach too far. I think they always do. And they're going to go after Iran, and that'll be a mistake. Yeah, Iran has been weakened, but Iran is still a large, militarily powerful state, and it has advantages. It is stronger than Israel in many different departments. And if it goes, a war between Israel and Iran would be won by Iran. Of course, if the United States becomes involved, that could change it. But the United States would pay a huge cost. So, those facts, which we've talked about earlier, they have not changed. I know that they're saying that the destruction of the air defenses in Syria make a huge difference. I honestly don't see it. I think it's probably made it easier. No question, it's made it easier for Israel to attack Iran. But they could do it before. Remember, they had all of eastern Syria was under U.S. control. And actually, the the northwestern corner of Iraq, there's a Kurdish enclave. So my understanding is that in the previous attack, they went over Jordan, eastern Syria, and northwestern Iraq and fired from that. And so that hasn't changed. I don't see that they get any closer to Iraq.
Just maybe a little shorter flight time, perhaps.
Yeah, right. So, maybe there's something I don't understand, but nobody's explained to me how it makes a really big difference. Israel has claimed that it does, but I don't think it makes a really big difference. And it doesn't change the fact that, again, Iran has this sophisticated air defense that can lock onto their most sophisticated fighter jets. So, I mean, even if they do attempt to fly right into, I think last time they did attempt, like with their F-35s, to fly into Iranian airspace, but they turned around when they realized that they'd been detected by their radars.
So, Israel made this claim after the last attack that they destroyed all these Iran's air defense systems. Do you think that is it possible they're even falling victim to their own propaganda? Because we saw this happen before, that they think that, we did do a lot of damage, or they have to be aware, right, that they didn't really hit anything.
You would think so. Yeah. Right, because it's funny how a lot of those claims came out like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and like even last week, I think I saw, another claim to that effect. And nothing has been backed up by satellite photos. And that is completely unlike Israel's usual practice. When they do make a successful strike on some sort of enemy facility or whatever, they always publish the photos. They haven't, and that makes you. I'm confident. There's just no evidence that they did that. So I don't know what they're thinking. They're probably. I'm sure the Israeli public believes it, but it's hard to believe that the IDF really believes it. Sometimes,
or the U.S., right? The Pentagon.
Yeah.
Well.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting. Again, he's going forward. Again, you have we have a different administration. We have Trump, who doesn't want this war in Ukraine, but he does want war with Iran, or he does want an attack on Iran. And he just may not listen to the cooler heads in the Pentagon and saying, hey, we can't really do this. I think he's, he may just go for it, in spite of the advice that's given to him. And Netanyahu just may think that Netanyahu may understand much better that this isn't going to work, but his calculation might be that if this fails and then Iran strikes back heavily, then we got we've drawn the United States in on our side, and we'll have to, because we'll have to escalate, and the only way to escalate is to actually increase the involvement of the U.S. So I think, again, from Netanyahu's point of view, this is great, even if we fail, even if he knows that it will fail, because that'll just suck the U.S. into this conflict.
I pray that this doesn't happen, but I'm afraid that Trump will start a war with Iran, and that will completely define his presidency. Everything else that people are talking about here, it's going to be completely overshadowed, and everything will go up in flames if he does this. So I really hope he listens to some people that are a bit saner around him.
Unfortunately, he just does. Yeah. I mean, the people that he's appointed, I think, just are almost entirely insane. Just as insane as he is on Iran. So it doesn't look very good.
It makes me wonder why there would be stories leaking out still now, you're saying 2 weeks, 4 weeks after Israel's attack, saying they knocked out these air defense systems. It's almost like they're trying to convince themselves or the United States, the clear path, just go for it.
Yeah.
But I think they know that it's there.
Yeah, I think that's clearly what's happening. It's, there have always been these Iran hawks within the U.S. government. They've always been there, and they've always been trying to, whatever they can do to drum up war with Iran, they do it. So earlier we had these stories about attempted assassinations or plots to assassinate Trump. by the Iranians. It's just totally bogus, but it was there. But clearly these are the same people, and I think they're the ones who are coming up with the stories of the successful Israeli strike. Now, they probably understand they cannot convince the real experts within the IDF or the Pentagon, but they can convince the public, and they can convince a lot of politicians. Because a lot of these politicians, it's amazing. I find it hard to believe, but it really is true. It clearly is true that a lot of them just believe what they see on TV, on CNN or Fox News. And sometimes they get these intel briefings that maybe tell them something different, maybe don't, because there's so much corruption within the intelligence services, but they seem to believe in TV. That's their reality. And so, if you get a lot of the politicians on your side, maybe that's all you need. They can override the resistance within, the military communities.
It's so crazy that these people don't have, our politicians just aren't fed reality. And
Clearly they're not.
They don't live in reality.
Yeah. And you can see it again. We see it again and again with respect to Ukraine.
Mm. So you were saying earlier that, the hubris is something that is the Achilles heel of Israel, and now they've moved into Syria, and they'll probably might bite off more than they can chew. They just keep on moving in. They have completely.
Well, I think Iran has always been is the
restraining factor.
Yeah, right. Well, and Iran is obviously the more powerful party in this case. Israel is clearly much more powerful than Hamas. It's amazing that Hamas has held out so long, and it continues to inflict casualties, on the IDF. They're much more powerful than Hezbollah, and they showed it. Yeah, at the same time, Hezbollah showed, we're able to withstand the ground invasion. But they did do a lot of damage to Hezbollah. They did kill a lot of, they just completely wiped out their leadership. And I'm sure they killed a lot of soldiers, but Iran is a completely different case, and it's a much larger country, and it's got some sophisticated military technology, and it's demonstrated that, and this is a completely different ball game.
So do you think that there could potentially be kind of a front opening up in Syria between Iran and Israel if Israel goes in too far?
I think it's going to, if it's a war, it's going to be an air war. It's going to be a
missile war.
Yeah.
So Israel has just annexed all of the Golan now, and has just stated that this is part of Israel now. It will never return to Syria. This is ours.
Yeah.
They're continuing to.
Yeah, they had said that before. What they had taken back in 1967, they formally annexed during Trump's first term, with Trump's approval. Now they've expanded, I guess, to get there was part of the Golan Heights that was within Syria, and they've gone even farther than that. And importantly, they've gone up north, and I think that's now they're able to outflank Hezbollah. It really strengthens their position vis-a-vis Hezbollah. They can attack them, not just from the south, but from the east. They can look down on them from the heights, into southern Lebanon, into the Bekaa Valley, and that really does weaken Hezbollah.
Right, they're probably not as fortified on that edge because they're assuming everything's going to be coming up from the north. Exactly.
Yeah, again, all those tunnels and so on, but they were built over the course of like nearly 20 years, and they haven't had the time to do that, and they won't. So Israel may, I think, very possibly will launch a new attack on Hezbollah, during the next few months, and part of it will come from the east. And that may be where, Hezbollah just may not be able to resist them there. We'll see.
So Israel has annexed more land, is pushing further and seizing more and more territory. Are we seeing much of an international condemnation of this move from
the Arab states, from Turkey, you have, but the Western states have just been completely silent, which is not surprising. Unfortunately, it's not at all surprising.
Right, but the hypocrisy should be apparent to a lot of people,
Yeah,
especially when we look
right.
at what's happened in Ukraine and Russia as
Oh
opposed to
yeah,
Israel. And
you would think
could you,
so, right?
could you just do a quick comparison for us between the annexation of eastern Ukraine, Crimea, and Russia invading into Ukraine, as
Right.
opposed to Israel annexing parts of Syria and invading further into Syria and Lebanon?
Right. Well, I think the most important thing is that, um, those territories, Crimea, is a special case because, of course, that was part of Russia. It was always part of the Soviet Union, of course, but it was part of Russia up until I believe it was 1957, 1958, when Khrushchev just decided to give it to Ukraine, which at that point was a part of the Soviet Union. So nobody was really terribly excited about it at that point. Um, but they have it's a very Russian, area. They've always considered themselves Russians. All like 90, well over 95%. And when Russia annexed it, you can say after the Maidan coup in 2014, um, I guess an additional factor is actually Russia has a military base there, uh, extremely important to them, right? A naval base. Um, well, Russia held a referendum, and it was passed overwhelmingly, and it was something that was monitored by Western powers, and they had to admit that this was done fairly. It was something. It was like 95% or higher that said, "Hey, we want to be with Russia." And then something similar actually happened in the Donbass, which we're talking about, Lugansk and Donetsk. They wanted to join just like Crimea did. And they made a request actually to the Kremlin, but Putin refused them. He was trying to work something out with the West, and through the Minsk Accords, but it never worked out. So it was back in 2022 that referenda were held in Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. The parts of Zaporozhye and Kherson, well, none of these were entirely under Russian control, but those parts are under Russian control. And you got well over 90%, I believe, in Donetsk and Lugansk. It was like 85% in Kherson and Zaporozhye saying, yeah, we want to join Russia. And it's not surprising. People have pointed out, and I think you have to admit they're right, that like a referendum that's held under military occupation like that during a time of war really isn't valid. But it does tell us something. It tells us something, I think, that people who know the region already knew, and that these are ethnically Russian areas that have a strong affinity, for Russia. So there's nothing surprising about these results. So, we're um, and of course, in the case especially of these four regions, it was not something that Russia was trying to do initially. They were doing everything to work out an arrangement where those territories, even though they are ethnically Russian, would remain a part of Ukraine. There were the Minsk Accords, but there was also this the Istanbul Agreement. That was a result of negotiations that immediately followed the SMO, and that too would have returned those regions, actually against the wishes of the people there. But just because Russia, wanted to maintain good relations with the West and respected Ukraine's territorial integrity, that would have returned those regions to Ukrainian control. They just would have to respect minority rights and not become a part of NATO, and there are a couple of other things involved. Now, in the case of Israel, they simply moved in and took this land, and these are not people. These are Arabs and Druze, and so I think it's a completely different thing. If they're going to, I think they're going to be there permanently. Actually, they are. They're already money has already been allocated by the Israeli government to promote settlements in the area. So they're going to do the same thing that they've done everywhere else, and they're going to ethnically cleanse it and replace the local people, with their own. And so it's a very completely different dynamic, you could say. The,
Mm. Won't Israel have a problem that they're going to run out of potential settlers? I mean, they're taking all this land and they're wanting to settle it. They're wanting to settle Gaza. They want to settle the West Bank. They want to settle southern Lebanon, the Golan Heights. And over 1 million Jews is what we're hearing have already left Israel. It's like,
right.
Where are these settlers? Like,
well, they come from, actually there's, again, the Jews that have left Israel, I think, are largely secular, Western-oriented Jews, and they have been a diminishing part of the Israeli population for decades now. They used to be the dominant group within Israel, but they no longer are. And one of the reasons that, there's immigration, but there's also just the fact that the kind of the right wing and generally religious Jews in Israel that the settlers draw from, that become future settlers, that they have a much higher fertility rate. There are a lot of the families have 10 children. It's actually very, very unusual within, you could say, for a white population. Because generally around the world, they like European descended people have, and Europeans have very low fertility rates, below replacement level. But that's not true in Israel. And that's not true of these people. So, yeah, they do have, there are settlers within Israel, they're very willing settlers, and there will be for the foreseeable future. Maybe they're not going to be able to populate these territories densely, but they'll be able to populate them.
That's going to create a real issue, though, for Israel, as you have this population boom amongst the settler movement. A lot of secular Jews, maybe living in Tel Aviv, that are more close to the West, are probably going to be leaving, or they have fewer children. So you really have this concentration of extremism. I think one of the things that's maybe driving such high fertility rates is the idea that this is their mission, their duty to conquer the land, that we have to take this, and they know that the only way to do it is to have a lot of children, because there are not enough people that believe in Zionism that they can import around the world, that want to come here and engage in essentially what's a crusade, a holy war,
Yeah, no, I think that's an accurate analysis, yeah.
So that just means that what we'll see then, we've already talked about how after October 7th, Israel changed completely. But I think what we're seeing is even a greater shift, as well as the secular movement. People leave, and we have this higher concentration.
Right. Well, all these trends will just continue. These tendencies.
They're accelerating, is what you're telling me, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
So that Israel is now truly an expansionist power. And you told me something.
It actually always has been. Let's be honest. And, when the secular people were in charge, they were just more careful about it. But they were expansionists too.
Right. They now openly expansionist.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's really those. I think those. Yeah, Zionism is expansionist, really by definition. It is about taking the land, from other people for the Jews. And it began as a secular enterprise, and then gradually, and then let's say after the 6-Day War, it was again a largely secular army, or I think overwhelmingly secular army, that did that and seized those lands. But then the settlers, they already had these religious Zionists among them, and they were the ones who tended to go and settle the land. And there was some hand wringing, always was among the secular Zionists about it, but they let it happen. They clearly did, and because I think when truth be told, they never ceased being expansionists. And so they simply used these people. But eventually these people that they were using to seize the land became the majority. And, they are now dictating policy. And they do things differently. They're all expansionists. They're all Zionists. But these people don't have any pretenses of being, of respecting Western values or whatever.
Right. This concept of Greater Israel was just introduced to me this year, I would say. I haven't heard of this idea of Greater Israel. I think a lot of people when they think of Israel, they just think, okay, yeah, it's, the how it was created was maybe a little bit iffy, but it's Israel now, and we can see the state. This is it. But as this concept of Greater Israel sort of goes more mainstream, I think it'll be difficult to say like, whoa, hey, that doesn't make much sense. So, first of all, is Greater Israel concept, is it something that's openly promoted within Israeli society, that this is their desire, that this is the plan? And what exactly is Greater Israel? How big does it get?
Right. Yeah, no, it's openly discussed. I think you have people on news shows showing maps, Greater Israel. Recently, during the ground invasion of Lebanon, there were articles that appeared in, opinion pieces about, yes, how southern Lebanon was always a part of Israel, and we need to take it. There was, in fact, I was just reading about this morning. I had heard about it earlier. But there was an archaeologist that accompanied the IDF into southern Lebanon because he was looking for proof,
That's what they always do.
Yeah, right. Oh, this is actually Jewish land. We've got to take this and drive the people off of it. He got killed, because he was right there at the front lines. But yeah, that's just one example. It's quite openly discussed. And even like 20 years ago and earlier, it was always there. It was just sort of, it was maybe they were less open about it, and not everybody agreed with it. There was more opposition to it within Israel, but over time, it's just like the notion of Greater Israel is it has become the dominant vision. It's they refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. I believe that, like, Netanyahu never refers to it as the West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria. And some of them, it's not quite clear how far Greater Israel is supposed to extend. Definitely Gaza, the West Bank, what appears to be southern Lebanon. But some of them say that we need to go all the way to Damascus. That actually is ours too. We'll see. It seems like the more successes they have, I think the more powerful that the extremist faction of the Greater Israel movement will become.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think about if you're just sitting at home and watching TV and you see somebody, on Israeli news pointing out like, okay, this is all of Israel here. And you're like, wait, that's where I live. And that's not Israel. They're openly saying that we're going to take this land, that this is our plan. And there's not a peep of it out from the West. But we always heard from when Russia invaded Ukraine, all this talk about how Russia's going to just take over all of Europe. They're not stopping at Ukraine. They're just plowing straight through. Can anybody point to anything, news stories in Russia showing like, here's the new Russian Empire. It's going to take all of Poland, and we're going to take back, East Germany. And there's nothing there, even though they keep on saying it. But like you said, it's been discussed about openly in public and on Israeli news for so long, but nobody seems to think that this is a problem within the Western world, that we'll just let it happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just thinking about this yesterday, just the extent to which, the U.S. has championed two causes, you can say two countries, that are clear expressions of ethno-supremacism. That's supposed to be almost by definition what we're not about, what we're opposed to, right? After the end of the Second World War, I said never again. It's just like the expansionist, ethno-supremacist power. That's the main threat to world peace. And now the two countries that we've decided to champion really and to support with all our might are precisely that. They're ethno-supremacist. That's really what they are. And so what do we actually stand for? Again, with, I think, outside of the U.S., out of the Western world, people looking in see this and just say, these people are totally phony. They used to talk about human rights, and I actually listened to them, because I think at one point we actually did stand for something, back, before the fall of the Soviet Union. It was imperfect, and, there were gray areas, but by and large, we were the free world, and we did stand for a certain, we had a certain vision of what was right and good. Now, you can point to all kinds of exceptions, murderous regimes that we supported. But I think by and large it was true. Just now, I don't think anybody can believe it that we actually, we mouth these words. We talk about, equality and protection of minorities and whatever. But now just think about it. The country that we overthrew was like one of the only countries in the Middle East where religious minorities were protected. And you could say the same was true of Iraq. We actually targeted those countries. Now, we'd have differences about, their authoritarian, freedom of speech and assembly is restricted there. So you can have differences. But the fact is, but that's equally true of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies and whatever. And they don't respect, minority rights. But the ones that did are the ones that we attacked. And then the countries that we champion are these ethno-supremacist countries. I mean, it goes beyond a double standard. I mean, it's just that what have we actually become? What do we actually stand for? We now seem to stand for the opposite of what we said we once stood for. We support the ethno-supremacists. We cover up for them. We pretend that we're about democracy. We can go also. We mentioned last time the obvious, let's see, all the hypocrisy and the double standards involved in elections that take place in Eastern Europe or Georgia or whatever. It's clear we pretend that we're about democracy, but just looking at it, like right now in Romania, of course, we annulled the election, or they did, the Romanian government, when the wrong person won. And now apparently they're arresting, leaders, various supporters of the movement, the political party that was going to win. And in Moldova, the government is reviewing all their judges and simply firing the ones that tend to be friendly to Russia. None of this is democratic by any means. Just like, all the things that we're supposed to stand for, we've become the opposite. And it just seems like at some point, we still pretend to be what we once were. We still use that language, but it has nothing to do with the reality. And you wonder at some point, just sort of like in Israel, the mask will fall and we won't even talk about it anymore. It's just, we support these ethno-supremacists. That's what we're all about. Why? It doesn't make any sense, but that's what we're seeing. That's the reality.
I think it's because we're completely consumed with destroying Russia, with being the global hegemon. So if we have to side with ethno-supremacists, as long as they're attacking, a rival power in our mind, then right. So be it. We have to do it. That's the great battle over time. And I think that's just the mindset that America has.
Yeah, well, that's true. But eventually you start to become the enemy of everything that you said you stood for because of that.
We already are. We already are.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Not eventually. You're correct. We already are. And then in the case of, the Zionist Israel, well, no matter what, we got to support them. I was thinking, too, the extraordinary fact that Al-Qaeda now has conquered and, taken over a country. This all began, the war on terror was about fighting Al-Qaeda. And he just jumped to the future and said, okay, Al-Qaeda is actually taking over a whole country and we're cool with it. What's going on? What has happened? This is just beyond, and again, there's another ethno-supremacist power that we use because they serve our purposes.
That's true. It's, the 9/11, this greatest attack on the United States, it's Al-Qaeda. And now we're working with them. How can we have...
Yeah, well, and it's not the first time we worked with them, over the last 20 years.
Are survivors of the 9/11 attacks or family members of people that lost loved ones, are they aware that the U.S. government is now supporting the regime, the organization that attacked our country, that brought down the
I'm sure
towns?
At least a few of them are. I mean, it generally doesn't make it into the narrative, but it has. It's not like this has been completely covered up within U.S. I'll look at New York Times, their Daily Digest or whatever, and they actually have admitted, the Al-Qaeda connections to HTS. I think you don't, like if you're watching Fox News, you probably would never know it now. But, that's what Fox News was all about at one point, was fighting Al-Qaeda.
Right.
But look where we are. It's just that we are now the reverse of everything, the opposite of everything we claim to be. And we're again, all our enemies have become our friends. And
right. But I mean, it seems like the connection between Israel and Al Qaeda goes back quite a ways, because you said they were funding Al-Nusra and actually treating wounded Al-Nusra soldiers or the Syrian civil war.
Providing them with logistical support. And,
okay,
that was back, 2012, around that time. So,
right, and Al-Nusra is just the second iteration of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra.
Yeah, Al-Nusra is basically was just Al-Qaeda in Syria, and then HTS was just a rebranding. Same people, Al-Jawad.
Right. Do you know how far back that this connection goes, where Israel was working with Al-Qaeda? Do you know? Probably nobody knows.
It's certainly possible it goes farther back. Probably does. But, in the
case of the...
Pre
9/11?
I don't think so. Well, yeah, we can get into that.
The dancing Israelis?
Yeah.
Do you want to go there?
Well, you can say, okay, they just say, yeah, there is clear evidence that the Israelis knew what was going to happen. I don't think they were directing it or anything, but they knew what was going to happen. They understood it was actually to their advantage.
You're talking about 9/11?
9/11, exactly.
So you think they knew?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. There's the dancing Israelis. That's actually made it into Fox News. Later they deleted it, but it was on their website for several days, that these Israelis, they clearly were connected to the Mossad, and they were overjoyed. They knew what was going to happen. They saw it, and they just celebrated. And because I think they understood that this was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is a disaster for the U.S., but it brings the U.S. in on our side, and we can get them to go after our perceived enemies, namely Iraq. Yeah, and then, Iran and Syria were also on the list. Now they got Syria. And, in the Middle East, it's just Lebanon, and I don't think, Lebanon has been greatly weakened already, and Iran.
Oh, man, it's so crazy. If that's really true, if they knew about 9/11, and there's also the USS Liberty incident, the Levant affair, and then everybody here just like, America, Israel's our greatest ally. Yeah. It's like, what? This is crazy. This is so crazy.
Yeah, sometimes like the Israelis themselves think it's kind of crazy. There is a tape of Netanyahu, I think better than 20 years ago, talking to some supporters. I think it may have been in one of those illegal settlements, and saying he says, well, I can get the U.S. to do whatever I want them to do. He's just bragging. He says it's just crazy, It's
It is. It really is so crazy. How come people can't wake up? I mean, I guess it's just the Israeli control over media, right? And our congressmen, our politicians.
Right. That's an awful lot of it. But, as we said earlier, it's also Christian Zionism, which is something that grew up independent of all that. Now it's, kind of merged with that, with the Jewish Zionism and the state of Israel and its obvious influence over our government. But Christian Zionism is something that actually antedated Jewish Zionism.
Do Christian Zionists, do they believe that all the Christians need to leave the Holy Land too? Is that really what they support?
They don't, I don't think they even regard them as Christians, or they just don't even want to hear about it. So, people will bring them up with it, and they just I think they just look the other way. I remember
white Christians, that's their idea.
Yeah, maybe. Well, they're at least, like in the early phase of Christian Zionism, there was some concern. I mean, not all those people were bad people. I think they, many of them were well-intentioned. And they started to notice some of these problems. Like, hey, wait a second, there are Christians there and they're suffering. They're being dispossessed by Zionism. But those voices were silenced long ago. And now I don't think any Christian Zionists, first of all, they don't know. They learn about it. They don't want to know. So they just kind of forget about it if somebody mentioned they're Christians. Or maybe they outright say, oh, these are just Christian heretics and we don't care.
Really?
Yeah. I haven't actually heard that, but I'm just guessing,
Right. It just, I find it a hard thing to wrap my head around. The phenomenon of Christian Zionism is incredibly bizarre. That, Jerusalem, these places, Nazareth, Bethlehem, everybody reads about in the Bible as a Christian, You got the birthplace of Jesus Christ.
Right.
There's the Holy Sepulchre. Everything is there.
Right, and there are large Christian populations. They're large but dwindling. Yeah, because of the persecution by the Israelis. Really,
right,
in Bethlehem, Nazareth.
And you're supporting the destruction of the ancient home of Christianity.
Yeah, well, this is what's already happened. There was a large Christian population in Iraq, and it's almost completely gone. Because again, Saddam Hussein, for all his faults, he did protect religious minorities. He protected the Christians. So there were Christians in his government. But after the downfall of Saddam Hussein, then all hell broke loose, and the sectarian extremists came out from the shadows and began attacking Christian communities, and they fled, and so it's gone. Now I'm afraid we're going to see the same thing in Syria,
right?
And then these are ancient communities that, like in Syria, these are like some of the oldest communities of Christians that they've been there since the very beginning, the first Christians. I think it was actually in Damascus, or was another Syrian city. The first time the Christians were referred to as Christians. Okay, that community that was described as Christian was actually in current day Syria, and so you can get a sense of how old these Christian communities are.
And it may not survive.
They may not survive, and same thing for Lebanon.
And
there's just no concern within the the Western government.
Over 2,000 years of Christianity in this community, and we're going to let and Christian Zionists are supporting the destruction of it. The oldest church, Orthodox Church, oldest Christian church, was destroyed in Gaza.
Right.
And I think something like 30 Christians were killed there, mostly children, when it happened.
Yeah.
It's just like
right.
And then we're just silent. We're not. It's hard for me to. It's disgusting. It's just hard for me to understand.
It is disgusting. It is.
Like, if you're a Christian, I guess your mind has been twisted so much to just think that the enemy is Islam, where they just assume that all of these countries, they're all Islamic, and this is a holy war, and Israel is kind of on our side on this holy war, without having any understanding of what's going on there. We think about like Hezbollah, where we say, it's a terrorist organization. They were the ones that protected the Christian communities in Syria and Lebanon against ISIS, where Israel was supporting ISIS.
Or supporting Al-Qaeda anyway. Yeah.
Al-Nusra, Al-Nusra. The whole thing is just so bonkers, and it's just so sad. If you're a true Christian and respect the history and the ancient faith of it, it's being erased from the Middle East. Thanks to
it's very sad. It's very sad. Yeah.
But it's thanks to the support of Christians in America, Zionist Christians, and a large part. If they didn't have that support, things would be different here in America.
I think it would be. There's still the Zionist influence would be very powerful, but there would be a chance for, at least like you would have more dissent. Certainly on the Republican side of the aisle. Because of the power of the Christian Zionists, it's virtually nil. You have Thomas Massey, and that's basically it.
Yeah.
Actually, I know Thomas Massey was one of the few people, like after the fall of Syria, he did call on all Christians in this country to pray for the Christian communities in Syria, because the persecution had already begun.
It's crazy. Yeah, I don't know if they'll survive. Probably not. They're going to flee, and then, the last bastions of Christianity in the Middle East are just going to be kind of wiped out.
Yeah.
Go America, go.
That's right. That's exactly what's happening.
How can we change? Can Christian Zionism, is there a force that can be stopped? It just seems impossible to educate somebody that is a Christian Zionist or is a Zionist to speak about it, rationally without being overly emotional, and to change somebody's mind on this position.
Right.
Is there any way that you could reach out to people and stop this sort of, I would almost call it a heretical version of Christianity?
Clearly it's a grievous distortion of the Christian faith, and it doesn't have. It's really quite recent. It began in the late 19th century or mid 19th century in England and Ireland, but it was very much a fringe movement. And it's not, it later, after it spread to the United States, it began to actually gain traction, especially in the early 20th century. But it was still fringe for a long time. It was really, towards around the time of the Six-Day War, it was already becoming a real force. And the Six-Day War, it kind of just gave it a huge boost. They felt like the prophecies were coming true, and it's now, I don't know what the percentages are, but they're quite high within Protestant and evangelical communities. There's it may be the kind of the default, the majority point of view. And yeah, it's something that, they've made it part of their faith. So like if you attack it, they feel like you're attacking their faith. And so that's really hard to get to them. Obviously some people do wake up, and all you can do is lay the facts out there and just hope that some people have the courage, to admit them. And it does happen, but I think it's really quite rare.
Right. Yeah. I think this Christian Zionism is it's just something that I don't think will disappear from the United States. It's really part of the fabric of American identity, American culture. Right. Even if Israel collapses and falls, you're still going to have people in the U.S. that are going to think that we're going to have to rebuild Israel. We have to go back. And
yeah. They'll probably think that's part of my, obviously, make America great again. The joke is really make Israel great again. That's something that critics of Trump has put up, but that's really how I think for them it's one and the same thing. That's the problem. So like if America goes into obvious decline, there's a huge economic crisis, Israel falls, they'll think that, well, we'll have to recreate Israel to strengthen America. I think that's probably how many of them will think, and that's the policy they'll actually push for.
Right. And because Zionism is just so powerful in the United States, thanks to Christian Zionism, he'll find the support for it.
I mean, Jewish Zionism is a big part of it.
Right.
And then there are a lot of people that are completely secular, and they're just as zealous in their Zionism. I would point to like Biden, he's a nominal Catholic, or Nancy Pelosi, but they're just as Zionist as Chuck Schumer or Hagee, even though their Zionism does not have a religious dimension.
And it is such a strange thing, especially for secular people, because we talked about that the U.S. is supporting ethno-supremacist states now. Yeah. And that's what Israel is. It's an expansionist, ethno-supremacist state. And that's our root for, if you're not secular, if you aren't a Christian Zionist, somehow you think that this is a good idea. That, let's support this. We'll throw all of our money behind this to keep on expanding this ethno-supremacist state.
Right. Well, when you look at Western Europe, I mean, they don't have Christian Zionism. The Jewish presence is very small. It's there, and it does matter in places like France and the UK. But by and large, all of these leaders are secular, and they're fervent supporters of Zionism.
Well, are they just fervent supporters of Zionism because of the United States, though?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's more than that. Especially look at a place like Germany. Unfortunately, they've got the idea that to somehow wash away the sin of Nazism. One of the ways to do it is to be just an absolute, fervent supporter of Zionism.
Are they thinking that, we committed a genocide, so if we support this genocide, it cancels out that genocide? Is that what they're thinking?
I don't think that's how they're thinking. They're just not thinking very clearly at all. But it clearly there are. It's not just. I'm sure there's no question about it. American influence is huge. Influence on the culture and politics is huge. But it's more than that. And I think for whatever reason, that's how a lot of these European leaders have decided that, we have this historical sin, and the only way to wash it away is always to support Israel. And it's obviously doesn't make sense, but that's the way they think.
But no country outside of Israel, the U.S. is as Zionist as America, right?
Right.
America is
Yeah.
clearly the most, and so that's the.
It's really very powerful in, well, both Germany and the UK. It's surprisingly powerful, but it's powerful among the elites, really, because I think you find much more dissent in those countries. Like
Right,
in the
the
UK,
people
I think
don't support it. Christian Zionism isn't the same phenomenon.
Yeah, right.
These
So
are not
there's
really Christians so much in Europe anymore. They're kind of all secular.
Yeah, well, they were never Christian Zionists. That was that's something that just didn't. It was never more than a very, very fringe movement in a very small part of Europe. Yeah, but the elites there are, they're very Zionist. They're secular, but they're extremely Zionist. But I know in the UK, a majority of the population is actually supports the Palestinians. It just doesn't make any difference. We have governments that just, ignore what their people want.
Yeah. Well, you touched on this before, but I'd like you to kind of speak about it again. If Israel collapses, it's just going to shatter that Zionist movement in the United States, right? How will it affect the U.S. society? Will just things break down? Like, what would happen? Like, being a Zionist is such a
I don't
terrible
know.
part of America.
Yeah, right. Like we said, obviously, Zionism has just become inextricably intertwined with American patriotism, with the American identity, and so a severe blow to Zionism, like the actual fall of Israel, its defeat in a war, is going to have huge repercussions in this country, not just within the foreign policy establishment, which of course is what will happen, when Russia wins the war in Ukraine. But in the case of Israel, it's going to be something that's going to is something that just the average person is going to be greatly affected by. And I don't pretend to know how they're going to react. I actually just earlier in this program I mentioned one possibility. It's just like they're going to insist on actually rebuilding. It's like starting the project all over again, because making Israel great is part of making America great again. That's one possibility. I don't know. I really don't know, because it's a very strange phenomenon that's not rational. So it's hard to predict these outcomes. And I don't pretend to say that I know what will happen. I just know that the repercussions are going to be huge.
Yeah, it's going to break minds across America.
Yeah, right.
And it's just everybody's minds seem kind of broken already.
Right, right.
Let's see how. Who knows? But it's something that I think we will see in our lifetime, though, right? I think that potentially even soon, saying within the next couple of years, because Israel is an expansionist power, and it's making these bigger and bigger moves now, and it seems dead set on attacking Iran and starting a war with Iran, and that's going to be devastating. That really might lead to the end of Israel. So this is something that is not, not overly theoretical. It's not too far in the future. This is the path that we're heading down.
Right.
And you've said that 99% of all conflicts can be resolved diplomatically. The only time you cannot resolve a conflict diplomatically is when you have a truly expansionist power. And that's what we see in Israel. It is truly expansionist.
Right.
It's an ethnic
supremacist they clearly
state.
do not, they do not want to negotiate. As we've mentioned again and again, they kill the negotiators. They support the most extreme faction of the enemy because they don't want to deal with moderates. They don't want to deal with somebody who can achieve some kind of diplomatic deal. Because they're going for the military solution. They're going for military conquest. That's what they're clearly committed to. So there really isn't any way to negotiate a settlement. I'm afraid that that's true. So the only way that Zionism will end is if it's defeated on the battlefield.
And that seems almost an inevitability as it continues to expand. And it's doing so more and more rapidly. Since October 7th, things have really gotten crazy. Before, it was a slow metastasizing kind of problem. Yeah. Now it's full blown out in the open. We're moving into Syria. We're doing Lebanon. We're doing it all now. And this is our time to go for Iran. It's going to expand until it ends. It collapses. And I think we're seeing that rapid expansion now and the rapid I hope soon to be the collapse of the Israeli state. I think it's going to be bad. It's going to be horrific, but I think that's the inevitable path we're on, and I think it could play out for us in the next couple of years. Would you agree?
It's certainly possible. Again, just like with that caveat, there's always things that come out of left field, and but that seems to be that the current trajectory that Netanyahu and his government are hell bent on war with Iran, and that's just not going to be good. That's going to have a disastrous outcome.
Right. Oh boy. Well, we're in for some interesting times. This next couple of years are going to be pretty crazy. I know it's horrifying, but it's also kind of exciting. Everything
Sometimes,
changes.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't feel that way. Yeah, it's certainly interesting. It's very, but other times it really gets me down. Like the fall of Syria and you just think about, and of course Gaza. I mean, it's horrible how people are suffering, through this.
Hey, and Ukraine, and I just want to say also, just on both sides, it's easy to get too removed from the human suffering aspects of this. But I've seen too many videos.
We talk about, now the official total in Gaza is 45,000, and we know that the real total is going to be a lot higher. It's going to be in the hundreds of thousands. Sometimes we forget, those are largely, the majority of them are women and children, and many of the men are also non-combatants. So we're talking, the vast majority is civilian deaths. In Ukraine, it's very different. I mean, the proportion of deaths that are civilian is actually historically quite low, and it shows that Russia is waging war against Ukraine, but it's not a dirty war. It's a conventional war, army against army. But that doesn't prevent it from being a tragedy. I don't claim to know how many, but I think hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian young, not necessarily young, actually, just Ukrainian men have died, and they were fathers and uncles and brothers and sons, and it's a huge tragedy. I mean, it's horrible. We don't talk about it as much because, in a way, it's done by the laws of war. But it makes it a greater, if they were signing up for this, as many of them did during the first year, they actually signed up for it. But now, recently, we see that that's not what's happening. They're not going there willingly. So it's an unmitigated tragedy. It's very sad. These are people who don't want to be there, and they're just being sent to their deaths. It's awful. So the sooner it ends, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the amount of dead in Ukraine it's crazy, that it's just completely unnecessary. The whole generation of men essentially wiped out, either been killed, wounded, or fled the country. There's really, it is a tragedy. And we're talking about Blinken is going there telling Zelensky to lower the age. Go send the rest of your men to die for just until January 20th. We don't care. Kill them all. It's it's just evil. That's what that is. The U.S. telling another country to send more and more men, to lower your age, to start sending boys now to fight that have their whole life ahead of them.
Right.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. Let's pray it ends soon. Let's pray that we're not going to have a nuclear weapon being used in the Middle East and just complete chaos and death and destruction in Syria, although that's where it seems like it's going to be heading. It just seems like it's going to be chaos. So yeah, it is terrifying. Yeah, maybe it's... I shouldn't say that it's an exciting time. It is horrific.
Yeah,
but I guess just getting swept up in the whole paradigm shift of the world, and the collapse
the only
of the American
thing is,
empire and Zionism.
The silver lining is that I think, I believe that the forces of evil in this case, which unfortunately, and I say with great shame, are led by my government, will in the end fail. The American empire is in decline, and they're going to lose in Russia, and I think eventually we're going to see a catastrophic war in the Middle East, and I hope again that won't just lead to utter chaos within this country, that it will be some kind of wake up call, but just these people that have taken over, these neocons, these Western hegemonists, their defeat is something to look forward to. Let's just put it that way. And, that's the one kind of silver lining. It's just going to be there's going to be a lot of unnecessary suffering and death up to that point, and unfortunately probably afterwards too. But it will be a good thing if they are defeated, and I believe they will be.
Okay, well, let's end it there then.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dad.